Heavy with us on this Thursday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Big day in Washington. They are going to be voting on what we're going to do with the Syrian and now Iraqi refugees. Interesting how it's expanding. Give it another 48 hours, and it's probably going to include the Mexicans. I told you all along that this is going to be the strategy of the Republicans to fight immigration reform. They don't want immigration reform. They're going to use fear and terrorism to get what they want. And that's to protect our borders and become the party that really cares about the security of America. Although that it's been President Obama who has fourfolded the resources on the southern border and deported more illegals than any other president in the history of the country. But we'll just put that aside, right? So now what's going to happen as this conversation has broken out, we're going to take this pause. I say it's not a pause. It's going to be an elimination. But this is the old playbook for the Republicans. They can't win the argument. They can't win the hearts and minds of the American people unless they play the fear card. The president's calling them out on it.
They've been playing on fear in order to try to score political points or to advance their campaigns. And it's irresponsible. And it's contrary to who we are. And it needs to stop because the world is watching.
No one in the media has really taken a great deal of time and resource to explain to the American people what it's like to try to get into the United States legally. It is a lengthy process, but we're getting a lot of stories on, well, it's so easy to get a fake passport and you can't vet these people. And it's almost as if these people are Martians. It's almost as if we have absolutely no ability whatsoever to protect the country and decide who belongs in the country or not. And so the threats, the fear-mongering, the hate, the racism that is starting to develop in our mindset, and now we're including the Iraqis. Do you know how many refugees this country has created in Iraq? It's well over 1 million people that had to leave that country because of the invasion of the Bush administration and what we have done in the aftermath of it all. So now we're picking and choosing people on faith. We're picking and choosing on how they look. We're picking and choosing them on whatever criteria we can just invent. Now, on this legislation that's going to be voted on today, and it's going to get kicked over to the Senate, is that whoever is in charge is going to have to personally sign off on the person, the human being coming into the United States. Now, who the hell wants that job? Who wants to get paid about $150,000 a year to be an administrator to personally sign off? Well, I said such and such person could come in, this little 3-year-old from Syria. It's ludicrous. It's not who we are. It's caving into the terrorists. And it's more playing on the fears of the American people, and low information voters are easily swayed to this kind of stuff. We have one of the most stringent vetting processes on the globe when it comes to getting people into the United States. And just because this terrorist went from Belgium to France and killed a bunch of people, well, that must be able to happen here in the United States. Have a little bit more faith in what we're doing. We haven't been hit on Obama's watch. We've been hit on previous watches. Of course, we can't point out Bush because that would be unfair. The conservatives get a little uptight about that. The people that have been running around this country telling us that they care about security are the ones that have made us the most vulnerable. They're the ones that want to make it hard for Obama. They won't even give him the authorization to use military force. It's been sitting in front of him in the Congress for 16 months, but they're quick to go out on the talking heads and rip ass saying that it's Obama's fault. Yesterday, I was watching Jake Tapper for a few minutes. Chris Christie, who polls lower than whale shit, who is not going to be president of the United States, is revered as some expert. He comes up with this idea that it's all Obama's fault, and all we have to do is get NATO to sign off on a no-fly zone, and that's going to solve all of our problems. That's how elementary these people are. Chris Christie's an expert on absolutely nothing, and I've never seen a guy get so much attention with such low polling. Martin O'Malley's got to be sitting over there saying, gosh, I need a new PR person. I'm polling better than Christie is over on the Democratic side. I can't get my mug on TV. It's a joke. But this is, if you want to parallel it, seriously, and if you paid attention back to the run-up to the Iraqi war before the invention, the narrative is very similar in the fear-mongering. We were 45 minutes to a mushroom cloud. Anybody that comes into the United States from Syria is going to be a terrorist and blow us up. Oh, there is seriously a parallel. So let's talk more about what's going to happen today in the Congress. They're actually going to vote on this to limit the Syrian refugee program. What they're calling it a pause. I call it the start of an elimination. Isn't it interesting how quickly the Republicans can move on their agenda, as opposed to maybe infrastructure of bridges falling down in America, killing people, or anything else that might be out there that might be good for you and for me as taxpaying citizens? It's just amazing how they are so agenda-driven. Let's visit now with Congressman Jim McDermott of Washington. Congressman, good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Ed.
Have you ever seen anything move so fast in the Congress as to limit this, quote, program that is going to bring terrorists into America?
You know, Ed, it's very awesome and worrisome, because what you're seeing is people reacting strictly out of fear. And when you see people do that kind of thing, they don't make good decisions. We've done that in the past. In our area, in 1941, we rounded up a lot of Japanese, assuming that somehow they were going to be bad. And then their soldiers turned out to be the bravest soldiers that went to war for us. So in many ways, this kind of reaction, a fearful reaction, is scary for the society, but it's worse because it's done by leaders, people who should be leading the society. Not.
You're exactly right, Congressman. Now, this is going to take it to a level of almost an impossibility for Syrian and Iraqi. Now they're including Iraqi refugees in this. Notice how that legislation is written up. And they're causing it a pause. I call it an eventual elimination. I think that's a real possibility. What do you think?
Well, in my view, it clearly is. What you've got here is a movement to keep anybody who's brown or Muslim out of this country. We've had these before. I mean, no Irish need apply is only 150 years ago. But what we're doing now is setting, imagine being a Muslim in this country right now and having the Congress acting as though everybody who comes from Syria and Iraq is a danger to us. That's just nonsense.
We're talking about orphans and widows and people who have been terrorized, people who have been living in these refugee camps. This is about rescuing people. And I find it very interesting that there is no debate in France over this. France has said they're going to take in as many as 30,000, and they're the folks that got just recently hit. What do you make of that?
Well, I think President Hollande made very brave statements today when he said that he was not going to respond to this kind of stuff, and they were going to continue to take refugees in France. And he showed the real class of the French culture, that they were not going to be scared to death by an incident like this. Surely everybody worried, everybody's scared. I don't want to for 1 minute minimize that, but what you cannot do is act like you are going to fix it by somehow closing the door on something that has been the way the world has been, where you could move from country to country.
Yeah. Congressman, it reads like this. The Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence would each have to sign off personally on every person admitted from the two countries, Iraq and Syria. I mean, if that's not setting up a bar that is going to eliminate, all it takes is one person to say no, they can rotate that around. I mean, this is all about shutting our borders. Instead of having confidence in the process, it sends a horrible message to the people who are already here in the United States and signals to them that we are a racist society. That's how I view it. Maybe you view it differently.
No, I don't. And I've taken a lead on a couple of people who were translators for us in Iraq and watched the difficulty it was, even for somebody who had worked side by side with our soldiers and who had saved people's lives because they could interpret what was going on in the street, and they had a hard time getting into this country. This is a message to the rest of the world. Do not help the United States, because they'll never help you. That's a terrible message to send out.
It is a terrible message. Is this going to pass today in the House, you think?
Oh, I don't think there's much question that they wouldn't bring it out if they didn't have a bunch of
And are there Democrats that are being hoodwinked by this as well, Congressman, people in your caucus?
I'm hopeful not. I hope that people will remember the past and remember how, we've got a system in place. It's not as though these people just walk into New York, jump off the plane at John F. Kennedy and come into the United States.
Yeah.
They have to pass almost a 2-year plan now to get in. It's very hard for anybody from Iraq or Syria to get in here. And we told the people who had helped us during the Iraq War that we would let them in, but we've only let 6,000 or 7,000 of them in since the war. So it's simply panic. And I hate to see the American people panicked by their leaders.
Congressman Jim McDermott, always great to have you with us. Appreciate your time here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Thanks, sir.
You're welcome.
You bet. Bye. When we come back, we'll talk about assessing the threats. Does this change the bar? Does this change the criteria? And the threats to New York City and their reaction. That's all coming up on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Stay with us. Hey, folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind, chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, WeGotEd.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.BIOGREENCLEAN and order today. It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems. Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bring you this production. Well, is it going to be New York City next? The other day, ISIS was saying that for sure Washington is going to get hit. Now there's a new video released by ISIS saying that there is an impending attack on New York City. Mayor Bill de Blasio responded to it last night at Times Square.
A video was released earlier today by ISIS portraying scenes of New York City, portraying scenes of Times Square, where we are now, and Herald Square, in an obvious attempt to intimidate the people of New York City. I'm here this evening with Commissioner Bratton and other leaders of our police department and the men and women of our department who patrol Times Square to make very, very clear that the people of New York City will not be intimidated. We understand it is the goal of terrorists to intimidate and disrupt our democratic society. We will not submit to their wishes. The people of New York City, as you can see right now, are going about their business even at this late hour.
And the mayor of New York City went on to talk about the character and the response of the New Yorkers.
It's important to note that there is no credible and specific threat against New York City. NYPD has been working very, very closely with the FBI and our other federal partners, and I again repeat, there is no specific and credible threat against New York City.
Joining us now is Congressman Eric Swalwell. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, good to have you with us.
Morning, Ed. Thanks for having me on the show. First time.
You bet. Good to have you with us. Being on the Intel Committee, I think most Americans think, gosh, you guys are just being deluged with all kinds of information, that it's just briefing after briefing. What's changed for the Intel committees, if anything?
Certainly the volume of ISIS success has gone up in just the 3 weeks with taking down an airliner, pulling off a just horrible attack in Beirut, and what we've seen in Paris. And now they are certainly benefiting from the fear that they want to instill in Americans. And, they're also starting to be more specific about the homeland here. They've, identified New York and Washington as targets. And so we should not discount their ability to carry out an attack like that, but we also should, not be intimidated. And ISIS should not discount our resolve to scrub them from this earth, find them, and disrupt any attacks they may want to pull off.
It's been documented just how primitive the bomb was and how simplistic the bomb was that took down the Russian airliner and killed those civilians over Sinai. What does that do as far as our security forces and intel are concerned, and how we function as a traveling society?
They're still looking at how that bomb got on the plane, and if the one that was put out by ISIS is in fact the one that took down the plane, it suggests strongly that somebody on the inside put it on the plane, which should concern us. We back in the Bay Area a couple months ago, we have an airport where baggage handlers were moving just hundreds of pounds of drugs around the country that were going into the airport and weren't being screened. And I was concerned then that employees at airports are not 100% screened. So I think we can actually take some smart procedures on our own without disrupting the flow of travel that could prevent something like this from happening here, the inside job, so to speak.
Congressman, how are we going to screen everything? I mean, obviously the TSA is on high alert. We see what's happening in airports, but what's happening behind the scenes with the baggage screening and all of that? Are we beefing that up, and what can we do?
We do a lot already to screen the bags that get on the plane, but I'm concerned about an inside job. And so I think starting to look at who has access to the plane, the people who clean the plane, people that put food onto the plane, the people that handle the mechanical equipment to test and make sure the plane's okay. We need to ensure that anyone who touches the plane, I believe, is 100% screened. That doesn't happen today, and we're a long ways from that happening. And I think we need to start, in light of what happened in Russia and other airline incidents, we need to step that up.
Your thoughts on the legislation that's going to be voted on today dealing with the Syrian and now Iraqi refugees attempting to come into the United States?
Security is our top priority. It's our first responsibility as members of Congress. However, being compassionate and not being driven by fear, I think, is also something we have to do. And we have a process in place since we started taking refugees from Vietnam that has overseas screening first by the United Nations, and then a process where once they go through all of that vetting, we start to vet them through the Homeland Security Department, cooperation with the FBI and the Department of State.
Congressman, you sitting on the House Intelligence Committee, how confident are you, or do you believe that the Russians, in cooperation with us, would be able to start a game changer, so to speak, on sharing information? Do you think we'll get to that level? Obviously, we're working with the French, but this is new territory with the Russians, isn't it?
We have to. And, we've had cooperation with the Russians, over the past 100 years when we haven't always seen eye to eye, whether it was, World War II or, other conflicts that have required cooperation. But this issue of ISIS is bigger than any issue between us and Russia. And I actually think the president would be served well to show American leadership. Let's have a summit and get all of the interested countries together and put out, a long-term vision on how we're going to do this, and also requirements for Middle East countries and what they have to do to step up and do a lot more to get ISIS from this earth.
Your constituents in California, do you think that they would support this legislation that is going to, do some cleansing? I think is what I call it, religious cleansing. Some may call it security. How do you think your constituents are responding to this?
The people at home are rightfully scared about whether we could be attacked here, but they also know that we do a lot to protect the refugees who come here, and they want us to show compassion. They don't want religious litmus tests. They don't want us to turn a shoulder to the rest of the world while the rest of the world deals with this refugee crisis. Ed, I have in my office my chief of staff was a 4-year-old who fled Vietnam came over here on a boat and talked to me about how his mother handed him over to his uncle, not knowing if she would ever see him again. That's what these refugees go through, the uncertainty of fleeing their country. They're not doing this willingly. This is their last choice. This is survival mode. And, we've always been a country that's taken them on. We can do it in a way that's smart for our security, but also compassionate as to who we are and what our values mean.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, great to have you with us. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much. I had no idea that the Republicans were so sensitive and just felt so personally injured by what the president has been saying. I guess words really matter. To the point where this nutjob senator who thinks he should be president, Ted Cruz, is now challenging the president to come say this to his face. Come insult me to my face. No one better to talk about that and Texas threats than Harold Cook when we come back. Stay with us.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
Had no idea that Mr. Conservative Tough Guy had such a thin skin, and I'm talking about Ted Cruz of Texas. Now, Cruz has suggested, along with some others, that we shouldn't let anybody into the country if they're Muslim, that the only people we should allow into the country would be Christians. And the president, of course, has fired back on that. On Wednesday, Ted Cruz complaining that the president's just been targeting him.
Well, I will say it's fairly remarkable that President Obama has now chosen 2 days in a row to attack me directly. He just called me offensive the day before. He called me un-American. I think that's really quite rich that he chose to make both of those insults on foreign soil while he was abroad, attacking me and attacking everyone else in this country who believes we should not be bringing in tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees, that the Obama administration cannot vet to determine whether or not they are ISIS terrorists. I got to tell you, it is utterly unbefitting of a president to be engaging in those kind of personal insults and attacks.
And is it American, Senator Cruz, for you to say that we should only allow Christians into this country? He goes on to say this.
And, he talked about how he was belittling the Republican field as scared. Well, let me suggest something, Mr. President. If you want to insult me, you can do it overseas, you can do it in Turkey, you can do it in foreign countries. But I would encourage you, Mr. President, come back and insult me to my face. Let's have a debate on Syrian refugees right now. We can do it anywhere you want. I prefer it in the United States and not overseas where you're making the insults. It's easy to toss a cheap insult when no one can respond. But let's have a debate. We'll do it on any station. I'm sure any one of the TV stations would be glad to host it. And let's have a debate on your refugee policy.
Well, Senator Cruz, when was the last time you did an interview with a liberal broadcaster? You wouldn't put your face in front of any kind of progressive thinker who's got a camera, who has any kind of mass media attention whatsoever. You're Mr. Protection. I think the president should invite Ted Cruz over to the White House with the cameras rolling and rip him a new asshole. That's what I think the president ought to do. Harold Cook, let's go to him. He is a political Democratic strategist from Texas, and this kind of plays into the old theme of George Bush saying, you just don't mess with Texas.
Well, it's good to be back. But I tell you, we Texas progressives keep warning people to stop voting for these Texans, and they so far they're not listening. Sorry about that. We keep sending the worst.
What is Cruz is obviously using this as a platform to get attention. Clearly, the president, not only on American soil but all over the globe, has been talking about how the United States is in the image business, and it sends a terrible message. And it really is rhetoric that needs to be stopped. And the front runner and the ringleader of it all is Ted Cruz. This is pretty much who he has always been, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, as a political strategist, it's who he's always been, and as a matter of political strategy, what Ted Cruz is doing ain't a bad shtick. I mean, he elevates himself to the level of bickering with the president instead of bickering with his Republican primary rivals for president, and that's a pretty good deal for him. Now, that's at the surface, though. Here's the problem. Here's what he forgot. As recently as last year, he was in favor and defending the United States taking refugees, including Syrian refugees. So he's kind of opening himself up to his Republican rivals, charging him with flip-flopping. But last February on Fox News, he said, and this is a direct quote, "We have welcomed refugees for centuries. That's been the history of the United States. We should continue to do so." And that was just last year. So Cruz has got a little problem here as he elevates himself to bickering, sophomorically with the president. He flip-flopped on this issue. And nothing changed except for the incident in France.
Yeah. He says, "Come say it to my face." That's so confrontational. Is that grandstanding, or do you think that Cruz is really pissed at the president?
Oh, I don't know that Ted Cruz believes a word of what he ever says, so he's probably not pissed at the president. I think, he used sophomoric language. He's probably taking a play out of Donald Trump's playbook. Look, it's the way to get attention among Republican primary voters these days to act childish, as witnessed by the rise of Donald Trump, as witnessed by all sorts of other things. Ted Cruz, if nothing else, the man knows how to grab a headline.
Okay,
and he's no fool on strategy. So yes, I think the sophomoric tone is deliberate on his part. I'm surprised he didn't follow it up by, "Oh yeah, you and what army?" and sticks and stones and all the other things that eighth graders say on the playground.
Yeah, Harold Cook with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Your thoughts on the Republican field? Is it Trump? He seems to have the best. He seems to has the best staying power. Rubio seems to be moving up a little bit. Ben Carson's on the slide. Is it those three? Would anybody else jump up into there? What do you think?
I actually, shamefully, think Ted Cruz is in one of the best positions to capitalize on the stumbles of anybody else above him for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's got an organization that can't be beat. He's got people in every congressional district on this end of South Carolina, and here's the wisdom of Ted Cruz's strategic thinking, if there is any, is that he understands that you don't have to be in the lead every day. You have to be in the lead on the day people are voting. And so I think he's perfectly happy to just do a slow build, both organizationally and message-wise, into Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. Now, all of this, there's a shortcoming to his thinking, and that is somebody's got to fall. And long ago, Ted Cruz assumed that Donald Trump would fall. Well, it's been a long time since we were all talking about the Republicans' summer fling with Donald Trump. I mean, Here we are in November, and he's still at the top. So, but and you can't control what you can't control. But when and if Donald Trump starts to fall, if his stick gets a little thin with Republican voters, then I actually think Ted Cruz is best positioned to fill that void, and it frankly scares me.
Okay, Harold Cook, great to have you with us. We'll do it again. Thanks, Harold.
Always a pleasure.
You bet. Texas Democratic Strategist Harold Cook with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary, brought to you by Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team. Like us on Facebook. We post stuff every single day on our website at We Got Ed, ringofireradio.com, and rawstory.com. We're back tomorrow.